With the new Commander Brackets System came 40 cards listed as Game Changer cards. These cards are restricted to the more competitive brackets of the system, and you can have up to 3 of them in Bracket 3. So here are some of the best replacement cards for a good chunk of the Game Changers, so you can continue to build your Bracket 2 or Bracket 3 decks. Let's start with a card I personally believe shouldn't be on the Game Changers list, Drannith Magistrate. A 2-mana 1/3 that says, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Drannith stops cards being cast off Cascade, flashbacking cards from the graveyard, or Underworld Breach nonsense. It stops cards being cast off of Plot, Suspend, as well as a number of other interactions. But it was put on the Game Changers list for the sin of stopping players from casting their commanders from the command zone. Anyway, that's the discussion for another video. In terms of replacing Drannith's effect exactly, there are no direct replacements. So you need to effectively work out what you want to stop and go from there. If you want to stop Underworld Breach and Graveyard shenanigans, there's All-Star Rest in Peace. Outside of white, there's Grafdigger's Cage, Weathered Runestone, and Soulless Jailer. Soulless Jailer also stops non-creature spells being cast off Cascade, as well as Suspend, Plot, and Foretell. On top of Soulless Jailer, there's also creatures like Kuranos, Lavinia, and Gadok Teague, who all have effects preventing or countering spells from being cast with certain conditions. Next, let's jump into some tutors. For Demonic Tutor, a 2-mana spell which simply says, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and shuffle. Now, you can simply replace Demonic Tutor with the more mana-intensive versions of it, Grim Tutor and Diabolic Tutor, which do the exact same thing. Or, if you want to keep the same cost, but maybe jump through some hoops to get the same effect, there's Profane Tutor, the Suspend version, Demonic Council, the Demon version, and Diabolic Intent, the Creature Sacrifice version. For Vampiric Tutor and Imperial Seal, you've basically got the same options. There aren't many tutors that are more efficient than them. For Mystical Tutor's replacement, you've got the Sorcery Speed 2-cost Merchant Scroll. You've also got the Sorcery Tutor Personal Tutor. There's also the slightly more mana intensive Solve the Equation. And if you need some more options for digging up spells, there's Micromancer and Spellseeker too. For Enlightened Tutor, you effectively have to pick, do you want to search for an artifact or an enchantment? If you're wanting enchantments, you can stay in white and replace Enlightened Tutor with Idyllic Tutor, Moonblessed Cleric, or Plea for Guidance. If you're searching for artifacts, blue is actually the colour you need to turn to here. You of course have the Trinket Mage cycle, there's Anchor to Reality, Fabricate, Whir of Invention, and Reshape to cover you there. Unless it's of course equipment you're looking for, then you can head back to white and get Steel Shaper's Gift, Stoneforge Mystic, and Open the Armory. Let's move on to some quick one-to-one replacements with tiny differences. Survival of the Fittest can be replaced with Fauna Shaman. It's practically the same effect, just stapled onto a grizzly bear. Likewise, Lion's Eye Diamond can be replaced with Diamond Lion. Yes, of course, I'm aware, Diamond Lion is significantly worse than LED, but it still goes great in a deck like Hashaton Scarab's Fist. For those running the $1,700 land, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which gives all creatures at the beginning of your upkeep pay 1 or sacrifice this creature, you can rest assured as there's some budget replacements there for you. Magus of the Tabernacle and Pendrell Mists both apply the exact same effect to creatures. Our next most expensive land on the list, Gaia's Cradle, can be swapped for Growing Rites of Itlamog, which impulses for a creature, and then at the end of your turn, if you control 4 or more creatures, which let's be honest, isn't hard for any deck playing green, it transforms into Itlamog, Cradle of the Sun, which is technically better than Gaia's Cradle because it can tap for green even when you have no creatures. I might as well point out and remind everybody of Storm the Vault, as that flips into an effective Tolarian Academy if you control 5 or more artifacts at the end of your turn. Now for Sarah's Sanctum, unfortunately there was no legendary flip enchantment equivalent, so you'll have to settle for Sanctum Weaver, which is just the creature equivalent. Now for the next lot of cards, there are no direct one-to-one replacements here, as these cards are so powerful, nothing even comes close. However, I found some cards that at least do a little bit of what these game changers are doing and might fill some of the void. For Trouble in Pairs, which lets you draw a card if your opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws a second card, or casts a second spell, there's Smuggler's Share, which either lets you draw a card or create a treasure at the end of each turn if an opponent drew an extra card or played an extra land. For Smothering Tithe, which nets you a treasure every time an opponent draws a card unless they pay 2, there's Monologue Tax, which grants you a treasure every time an opponent casts their second spell. Effectively, these replacements are the nerfed versions of the game changers. For Thassa's Oracle, which effectively has a triggered ability that says if there's no cards in your library, you win the game. You can try and replace it with Laboratory Maniac. Now it's worth mentioning here that Lab Maniac's ability is a replacement effect, not a triggered ability. So if you do go for the win with something that draws your whole deck plus 1 more, your opponents can simply respond and destroy the Lab Maniac and prevent your win. You could also go with Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, who has the same passive ability as Lab Maniac and is slightly harder to remove due to it being a Planeswalker. Ad Nauseam is a powerful card draw spell, where usually the entire deck is built around this card. The goal is usually to have very cheap or free cards in your deck, cast Ad Nauseam, and then practically draw your entire deck. For repeatable card draw in black, on this level there's Necropotence and Necrodominance. Limdal's Vault is an often forgotten card that can let you sculpt the top 5 cards of your library. For 2 mana, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, then you can pay 1 life to put those 5 on the bottom of your library and look at the next 5 cards. You can then repeat this process until you find the 5 cards that you like, shuffle the rest of your library, then place those 5 cards back on top in any order. Another card that's slightly similar to what Ad Nauseam is trying to do is Dance with Calamity. If your deck is built around cheap spells, you should be able to get a lot of value out of Dance. If your average spell cost is 2, getting 6 spells shouldn't be too much of an ask. For Rhystic Study, there's literally no other card that lets you passively draw cards for free due to your opponents just playing the game. There's Mystic Remora, which is a close second. Otherwise, your only option is to simply piggyback off the card draw your opponents play, with things like Alm Collector, Fairy Mastermind, Notion Thief, and Wedding Ring. But again, Rhystic Study is such an effective card in Commander, nothing even comes close. Bolas's Citadel is another one similar to Rhystic Study. It's effectively Future Sight combined with Omniscience, and unfortunately, as far as I can see, the closest I can find to something like that in black is Into the Pit. And that's still a stretch to get to Citadel. Otherwise, you're simply better off splashing blue and just playing Omniscience. Underworld Breach is another example of this, a card so efficient, nothing else in the game really compares to it. And what's really funny, all the comparison cards aren't even in red. There's Yawgmoth's Will, Magus of the Will, Gaia's Will, Forgotten Cellar, and Six. And out of these cards, Six is the only one that lets you recast things from the graveyard without exiling them. One card that I did want to mention that isn't on the Game Changers list, but still took a hit thanks to being mass land denial, is Blood Moon. This is another card that I feel paid the price for another card's sin. Blood Moon is an excellent tool to shut off all these extremely efficient lands that have fantastic abilities stapled onto them. And as someone recently pointed out to me, Blood Sun is a great replacement. It doesn't stop your opponents from playing the game, but it simply removes all the non-mana abilities away from lands, which is ultimately one part of what Blood Moon is trying to do. So there's a bunch of replacement cards you can use in your Bracket 3 decks. Did I miss any? Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to like the video if you learned something, and subscribe because if you don't, I'm putting Island on the Game Changers list. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.